How's it going, YouTube? Happy Tuesday. Coming at you from one of my, well, to be honest, least favorite states, Indiana, specifically the Love's travel stop here in Roselawn, Indiana on 65 southbound. And before I get into the meat and potatoes of this video, a couple of broker stories. First up, yesterday, while I was getting my APU fixed in the shop and getting the AC system sorted out, hopefully for good and all, I was browsing the C.H. Robinson and Coyote load boards, just seeing what was available. There was a couple of short hops out of Cedar Rapids that C.H. Robinson was offering. I put an offer in on one that was going southwesterly. They didn't much like it. All right, well, I'll try the other one because it was going north into Wisconsin. Put an offer on that one. They didn't like that either, but the broker on that load called me back right away. Not my usual guy, but the guy who was actually on the load. Said, hey, you're still interested in this load? This is where we're at on it. Can you work with us? And I'm like, yeah, what the heck? It wasn't like I was asking for the moon on the load, just a little bit extra. They didn't want to come up. But it was still a good rate. It wasn't like I was getting some cheap rate that was going to screw me over. I came out ahead of the load overall. And I wanted a short hop because I was thin on hours. And I'm still thin on hours, but now I'm getting into my recap zone. So every night I'm going to roll off, however many hours from last week. But what I didn't realize is that apparently the broker on the other load that I had bid on countered and tried to book me on the load. So I had to quick call that person up and say, hey, I'm sorry, there was some confusion. I've already booked a load from the same shipper with one of your colleagues. Agent was very understanding, worked it out, took me off the load, sent me an email saying, yeah, you're off the load, no worries. Okay, no problem. But it was still one of those things like, okay, well, it's nice that they wanted me to move freight for them, but it's like, hey, you didn't accept my offer and you countered, but then I didn't get an opportunity to accept. You just kind of booked me on it. That's a little sketch, but I think it's just one of those things where they wanted to get these loads booked. So they were just kind of going, and so that was a bit of a miscommunication there. So, but it all got sorted out. There's no harm, no foul. I didn't get double booked. And everything's fine. So, got that load done early this morning. And then headed over to my reload, which is the load I'm on now, because surprisingly enough, after I booked that load with C.H. Robinson, get a call from TQL, the trucking industry favorite punching bag, at least among brokers. They said, hey, you're going to have a truck in this area tomorrow going down to the Atlanta region. And I was like, well, I actually might. I might actually be in that region myself. So, let's talk the details and load, see if we can come to terms in this bad boy. Because even when TQL calls, even though they're not my favorite broker to work with, every now and again, I do get good loads with them. So when they call, I always pick up. I listen to them, and if there's an opportunity in there, hey, you know what? It makes sense for me, I'll do it. Because I don't have anything against TQL personally. And like I've said previously, my experience with TQL to this point has been, at the very least, neutral, but has usually skewed positive. So it's difficult for me to consider TQL a bad broker, despite the fact that I have had calls where they've been asking for me to move freight at very cheap rates, and I have politely declined. But, I never savage the agents who call. I'm always respectful and polite. Maybe that helps. I don't know. But anyway, so they called me about this load, and they were offering a decent rate. It was over $2 a mile. Okay, well, this is positive. TQL coming to the bat. with, plus $2 freight. Okay, this is something to listen to. Talked about it a little more, did some negotiating. I got them to come up. They came up a little bit higher on the rate for me, which was really nice of them. And I agreed to do the load. So now I'm on this load that I picked up this afternoon, actually a little bit before noon, in Wisconsin. And I'm going to run it on down to the Atlanta region. And by the time this video posts, I'll be well on my way down to Atlanta, because this video won't go up until I've long since left Roselawn. But what I was originally going to focus on talking about is Indiana, the state of Indiana, which, as I mentioned at the start of this video, is not one of my favorite states. It's actually one of my least favorite states to drive through for a variety of reasons. Number one, when I was with Werner Enterprises as a company driver, I did a lot of operating in Indiana, because the account that I was on when I first started driving for Werner was an account that literally it operated, out of Joliet, Illinois, where Werner has a terminal, a nice terminal, at least it was last time I was there. Hopefully it's still nice. And I only went to the states surrounding Illinois. So a lot of Michigan, a lot of Wisconsin, a lot of Minnesota, not much Iowa actually. I think the occasional Missouri load, but typically it was Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Indiana, Ohio, and like the oddball Kentucky load. That was my typical range. That's the typical states that I was in. So I did a lot of running through Indiana. And my dislike for Indiana is not to do with the people or the politics. Take of that what you will. It was Gary, Indiana. It is always absolutely hell to try to get through in a reasonable amount of time if the sun is up. If the sun is down, maybe you get lucky and it's not going to be insane, but you just have to assume that if you're going to Gary, Indiana, and it is not 3 a.m, you're not going to have a good time. That's just kind of the way I look at it. And that's just sort of the way it is in a lot of respects for Indiana. Number two. Well, before I go to number two, number one still, because I did a lot of loads in the Detroit area for Werner, I was always going through Gary, east and west, and it was never fun. It was always just a bear to get through there. So that's why I didn't like Indiana. That's why I don't like Indiana, really, because whenever I think of Indiana, I automatically think of Gary and how awful it is to try to get through Gary, Indiana. And if you're a trucker, especially now that Gary, as of July and August 2023, is under some pretty serious construction on 8094, it's even less fun. So, but hopefully at some point the road through there will be finished. But until that time, I really just try to avoid it by either coming down 57 to Kankakee and taking Illinois Route 17 east until it becomes Indiana Route 10, then cut into Roselawn to pick up 65 south and then on to Indianapolis. Now, reason number two is Indianapolis itself. Up until recently, Indianapolis was under massive construction. They had 70 closed through Indianapolis because they were replacing bridges, redoing the road. I mean, a lot of really good work that needed to be done. So in order to get around Indianapolis, you had to use the Beltway, 465 and 865. And because of the construction that was just everywhere through Indianapolis, it made Indianapolis just awful to deal with as well. So you've got Gary, you've got Indianapolis, both are just heinous traffic situations unless you were coming through there, in literally the middle of the night. Like, we're talking after 11 o'clock and before 5 o'clock in the morning. That seemed to be the only decent window where Indianapolis and Gary both weren't just the worst to drive through, at least in the Midwest. So, yeah. But anyway, now that Indianapolis is mostly done with its construction and I-70 is considerably improved, I'm finding it very difficult now, at least, to dislike Indiana in that regard. Number 3 reason I didn't much care for Indiana is that truck parking was, emphasis on was, a lot more scarce 2.5 years ago when I was still a Werner Company driver. And even when I was an early owner-operator. I spent my first 4 months as an owner-operator driving for Werner. So, now though, before I get too much further, I'm talking about that to conclude this video is what Indiana is doing to address the truck parking situation. But reason number 4, didn't much like Indiana, is that a lot of the loads that I was doing in Indiana were in the rural area, and there's just, in some respects, for some of the loads I've done through Indiana, there's just not a lot to do, not a lot of ways to get to where you're going unless you're on 65, 70, 74, or US 30, or even I-69 down south of Indianapolis, or no, up to Fort Wayne too. I forgot about Fort Wayne. It's easy to forget about. But, it's just a state that just, having seen literally most of the state at this point, it's just such a very dull state, and it's very difficult to find things about it to speak positively about until now. And why I'm specifying where I'm at, which is Roselawn, Indiana, is because the state of Indiana is making significant inroads, as bugs try to get at me, into addressing the truck parking situation, at least on 65. And I have to say, what they're doing, I am wholly in favor of, and it is helping me to revise my opinion of Indiana into a far more positive situation. Positive light, positive reflection, positive opinion. Pick your own term, I guess, as long as it's a positive cognate there, I guess. Anyway, so about a year ago, give or take maybe a year and change ago, Indiana closed the rest area on 65 southbound just north of Roselawn. And once they closed it, they leveled it, completely demolished it, took it all the way down to the dirt. Not one stone left, no asphalt left, no concrete, nothing. They tore it all down. I'm like, okay, what's going to happen? Now, earlier this afternoon when I drove past it, I see what they're doing, and it is magnificent. It looks like the rest area that's going in now, and it's getting pretty close to being ready, it's going to be able to accommodate, it looks like, at least 150 trucks. At least 150 in parking spots, not just on the concrete, after all the spots are full, but 150 trucks in spots, in actual painted lines on concrete spots, which is magnificent. That is awesome. That is fantastic news, because I heard a stat, a couple weeks ago, a month ago, that in the continental U.S., in the 48 states of the United States, there is one parking spot for every 11 trucks. Now, just how accurate that stat is, I have no idea. But I'm going to assume it's at least in the ballpark. And that's also why you have issues with that problem in Illinois a couple weeks ago where that Greyhound bus smacked into a couple of trucks overnight and people died. I don't know the ins and outs of that situation. All I know is that it was avoidable. Illinois needs to get themselves going on some rest area improvements and get some better parking situations addressed, because Indiana's making some headway there. At least 2 or 3 major truck stops have opened up on 65. Another one actually is here in Roselawn, because across the way, if you're on 65 coming southbound, you exit for Roselawn, and when you come up the off-ramp, you're at the stop sign, not stoplight, stop sign, which is unfortunate, but whatever. And you're at the stop sign for the intersection there. If you turn right instead of left to go to the Loves and the TA, there is a new Compass truck stop. It looks like it's about, I don't know, at least 90 parking spots, which is, again, that's fantastic because you're just south of Gary and Merrillville and I think Shearerville and Valparaiso and all these other major areas on a really important throughway down to Indianapolis. And then also, of course, back up to Chicago. Now there's more truck parking there, which is really excellent news. And I have to applaud Indiana and the businesses that are investing in opportunities in Indiana to help address the truck parking situation. So, tip of the cap to you folks. Thank you very much for that. We really do appreciate it as drivers because the more safe parking we have, the better off everyone is, because then we don't have situations like that Greyhound bus catastrophe a few weeks ago in Illinois. And then, of course, also you don't have trucks parked on on-off ramps because they don't have any other choice. They've got to stop. They've got to shut down. And the only way they can find anywhere off the road to park is on an on-off ramp, which is not safe. I have been very fortunate so far never to have needed to park on, an interstate on-off ramp. I've come close. I've had to park on rest area on and off ramps, but they've always had enough space where I was all the way off the road and not in any capacity blocking traffic, which was good. But still, it was not, my equipment was not in a painted, secure parking spot. And occasionally it just happens. Like, if you got to do that, you want to be at least in a truck stop along a curb where you're out of the line of traffic, you're out of the right of way, but you're at least completely off the interstate and you're in the idea of safe parking, if not actual safe parking, because on-off ramps are not safe parking. And unfortunately, because of the truck parking situation, it's not going to be able to be addressed as rapidly as it truly needs to be. It will be piecemeal, unfortunately, because the companies that want to build more truck stops, they've got to go through the red tape, they got to get approval, they got to get zoning. And, pick your favorite truck stop brand. If they want to open up a new spot in Boo-Foo Nowheresville, they got to go through Nowheresville's whole process to get approved, get zoning, permits, construction, inspections. From the time they have the idea and go buy the land and get approval to buy the land, you're looking at 2 to 3 years before that facility is open and able to accommodate trucks, at least in terms of truck parking. So that's just the nature of the beast. That's just how it is, because them's the rules, them's the breaks. Things just cannot pop up overnight. We don't have the technology yet. Maybe one day we will, but we're not there yet. Anyway, my opinion of Indiana is being revised because Indiana is investing in their infrastructure in a way that I wholeheartedly support. Now, I didn't enjoy the construction on the Indianapolis Beltway or on I-70, but it needed to be done. And I knew it needed to be done, and I knew that all these traffic jams were a result of the project not happening, 20 years ago or whatever, or replacing 20 years ago, the work of 20 years ago with the, modern work or whatever. So, it is what it is. But it made it hard to like Indiana because I was always going to strip malls in hard to access areas, and I have to go through Gary to get there. That's really my biggest complaint about Indiana, is that no matter what is happening anywhere else in the state of Indiana that's positive, Gary, Indiana still exists as it currently is. It is the biggest choke point, that I go through ever, I think. I mean, I've been through a lot of choke points, and Atlanta's pretty awful, but I think Gary is worse just because there's no good way around it. Atlanta, at least you can dodge by just getting creative and just adding some time to your trip. Gary, Indiana is harder to dodge, in my opinion, because you got Lake Michigan to the north, so you've got a geographical barrier. And then you've got Chicago. You've got the city of Gary. You got the that big, massive steel mill. You've got railroads. You've got Gary Airport. You've got a lot of residential, a lot of business that is obstructing the opportunities for roadways to go in that would create a new beltway to loop around and completely avoid the Gary bottleneck. But, you know, it's just the way the cards fell. Gary just kind of became a choke point where Michigan, Indiana, Illinois all come together and hate each other as a result. But it is what it is anyway. It is what it is. Righto, that's going to do it for my evening walk. Thank you so much for watching. I do appreciate it. I'll see you down the road.